Justin Trudeau attacking crisis pregnancy centers. Now, this story isn't a shock to those of us who have been following Justin Trudeau's trajectory since the beginning of his career. Some of you will remember that in 2015, he announced that no pro-life members of Parliament, no pro-life candidates could run for the Liberal Party of Canada, which was a deviation from a long-standing Liberal tradition in which a percentage, at some points quite a significant percentage of the caucus, was not only pro-life, but would vote pro-life. The Liberal Party of Canada often allowed MPs to vote their conscience, and there were some very high-profile Liberal MPs who did so. But as we've discussed previously on this podcast, throughout Justin Trudeau's entire career, the abortion issue has been an issue he's very passionate about, and one of the reasons is it's very personal for him. But I think that what the Liberal Party did this week is a step further than even the most radical pro-abortion politician is usually willing to do, farther than they're usually willing to go. Let me read Justin Trudeau's announcement on X this week. Some crisis pregnancy centers are dishonest. They don't provide abortions, and they purposely don't tell you that. Women have choices in Canada. If these centers want their charitable status, they need to be transparent about the choices they offer and the ones that they don't. Now, there's all kinds of things wrong with this, but the reality is that the reason Justin Trudeau is saying this is because one of the Liberal members of Parliament, the Minister for Women and Equality, Women, Gender Equality and Youth, the titles keep on getting longer, has recently put forward a motion to propose legislation targeting crisis pregnancy centers in Canada. And in a moment, we'll get into what crisis pregnancy centers do. But I want to emphasize that again, as I said earlier, the reason this is no surprise to those of us who have been following Trudeau's trajectory is because back in 2021, he actually promised that he would be targeting crisis pregnancy centers eventually. This was on the docket for a while. The Liberals just hadn't moved on it. And I think a lot of pro-lifers started to think that maybe he had forgotten about it, that maybe attacking centers that provide resources to low-income women was too far even for Trudeau, or that maybe this just wouldn't fly in public. But now, especially as an election might be looming, and I suspect that's one of the reasons he's doing it, now that is on the agenda. So let me play for you the announcement in the House of Commons by the Gender for Equality, whatever, Minister Marcy Ien. I think I'm pronouncing her name properly. And here's what she had to say.
Our government is committed to ensuring every woman has the right to make informed decisions about her body. Therefore, pursuant to Standing Order 83-1, I would like to table, in both official languages, a notice of ways and means motion which contains our plan to require more transparency from charities who use deceptive tactics to push women away from making their own reproductive decisions. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, I would ask that an order of the day be designated for the consideration of this ways and means motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So there are all kinds of problems with that announcement. She told a half dozen lies in less than a minute. The idea that crisis pregnancy centers are dishonest and using deceptive means, which is something Trudeau said too in that tweet that we just read you, that they purposely don't tell you that they provide abortions. I was unaware that every charity had to make explicitly clear what they don't do as well as what they do. This is not a standard that's been applied to any other charity. But this is just a straight up attack on crisis pregnancy centers. And before I get into all the details, I want to play you one more clip. This is probably the most insufferable of the clips that I'll play you. This is Christy of Freeland. She's been shuffled from portfolio to portfolio, so I don't remember what her portfolio is currently. But she posted this with the caption, "Every woman deserves the right, the freedom to choose. Every woman deserves the right to reproductive health care," by which she means abortion. That's why we're requiring more transparency from pregnancy crisis centers, she couldn't even get that right, to stop misinformation and ensure every woman in Canada can make informed decisions about her body. This is a minute-long clip, and then let's get into some of the things that she said here, as well as her colleague Marcy and Trudeau.
And being a mother is so amazing, and I feel so lucky to be a mother. But I also know that there are few experiences in the life of a woman or a girl than finding out you're pregnant and not wanting to be. That is terrifying. It can be life-changing. It can be a tragedy. Maybe for some people it can be an unexpected miracle. But every single woman and girl in Canada who finds herself with an unwanted pregnancy, or maybe a wanted pregnancy that is not viable, she deserves fully transparent information and fully transparent care. I believe that absolutely profoundly. This measure, which was a 2021 platform commitment, is about ensuring that every single woman and girl in that kind of a terrifying situation is not misled, has clear and transparent information. And it's about ensuring that the money of Canadians is not being used to underwrite organizations that mislead young women and girls.
This is insidious for a whole bunch of reasons. Let me give you just a few. Freeland there is talking about an unexpected pregnancy, of course, is inherently terrifying. She is projecting a narrative on pregnancy and asserting that this is the common experience. She also asserts that women deserve to have a choice. And this is incredibly ironic in a Canada where, after 10 years of Liberal rule under Trudeau, under Freeland, many women, in fact, do not have choices. We've talked about this on the podcast, but in Canada this year, there's a record number of Canadians seeking help at food banks. Housing is increasingly expensive. Everything is more expensive. And any Canadian who actually pays their own bills will tell you this. And in fact, one of the things that we've discussed on the Bridgehead briefing multiple times is the fact that right across Canada, many people are opting for euthanasia because they feel like they have no other choice. The healthcare they need isn't available. The housing they need isn't available. The disability care they need isn't available. The benefits they need to survive day to day, week to week aren't available. And so many people are finding themselves at the end of a lethal injection, not because they're being offered this choice, because it's the only choice that they see available to them. One physician put it to me in really chilling terms. He said, for many people, euthanasia is the only thing that they are eligible for at all, despite all of the complex care needs that they have. The same thing is true for abortion. Many women do not have the choices that the Liberals are claiming that they should have. And that is in large part due to Liberal policies as well. Let me quote from a particularly interesting source, the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada. And I should say up front that the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada is the most pro-abortion group in the country and one of the most pro-abortion organizations in the Western world. They have never met an abortion they didn't like. They support abortion throughout all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason or for no reason at all, funded by the taxpayer. Joyce Arthur of the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada does not believe pro-lifers should have the right to freedom of speech. When pro-lifers have been attacked in the streets by abortion activists in Canada, Joyce Arthur has suggested that those pro-life girls had it coming, essentially, for stating their pro-life views in public. She's also suggested that infanticide should be a lesser crime than murder. So this is the source we're talking about, and I chose this source very deliberately. In 2018, they released a report titled Why Women Have Abortions. And let me read you a sentence from that report that really contextualizes what Marcy and Justin and Christia are saying here. Quote, many women state they have no real choice as they do not have the financial resources to support themselves and a child. Let me read that again one more time. Many women state they have no real choice as they do not have the financial resources to support themselves and a child. And now the Liberal Party of Canada, under Justin Trudeau, is targeting the few centres in Canada left that provide those resources so that women can actually make the choices that they want to make. If many women state they have no real choice, and crisis pregnancy centres are actually offering them diapers, cribs, care, social networks, people who can babysit. These centers offer every imaginable kind of help that a woman in a crisis pregnancy might actually face. Trudeau's actually targeting these centers. These are essentially social welfare centers helping struggling moms. And the assumption that the Liberal Party makes, the underlying assumption of this move and of their worldview, is that there is such a thing as an unwanted baby, but there is no such thing as an unwanted abortion. That is the underlying assumption. It is belied by all of the data. It is belied by personal testimony. It is in fact belied by the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada, which loves to defend abortion in all of its forms. In fact, based on this data, it's safe to say, I believe, and this is also based on hundreds, if not thousands, of my own personal conversations with Canadians about abortion over the last 15 years, that there are more unwanted abortions than there are unwanted babies. And so the narrative that you see, especially Chrystia Freeland rolling out here in her sort of vile minute and 17 seconds there, is absolutely disconnected from reality, and also disconnected from the reality that the Liberal Party has brought into being in Canada since 2015. So let me give you some other facts about crisis pregnancy centers here, just for a moment, to give you some context for what the Liberals are attacking here. Over the past 24 years, 190,741 women and men accessed help at Pregnancy Care Canada affiliated pregnancy centers. I want to emphasize here, that's just affiliated centers with Pregnancy Care Canada. There are, in fact, many individual crisis pregnancy centers that do phenomenal work. I think of the Back Porch in Edmonton, which operates right across from the Morgentaler Clinic, Aid to Women in Toronto, which is also located near their abortion clinic that's doing phenomenal work. So this is actually a drop in the bucket when you look at crisis pregnancy centers, but we have good numbers for this organization, the PCC at least. 188,158 client visits for material supplies such as diapers, formula, and clothing. Things, by the way, that the Trudeau government has made far more difficult for anybody to afford. 18,879 clients helped through prenatal education. 33,000 clients helped through parenting programs. 10,470 women requested and received support after their abortion. The Trudeau government is nowhere for you after you suffer pain and regret and longing after an abortion, because as far as they're concerned, it's just healthcare. Post-abortion syndrome is a figment of these women's imagination. And tens of thousands assisted through phone calls, text messages, and online. This is, again, just a drop in the bucket of what crisis pregnancy centers and homes for unwed mothers and all manner of charitable organizations have been doing across this country for decades. These centers essentially respond to the reality that abortion exists in this country and seek to mitigate the fallout in every way that they can. And I want to emphasize here again, when they talk about Canadian taxpayer dollars, all of this was done with donor dollars. People, almost all of them Christians, by the way, seeking in love to desperately give women the need that they have, to give women, to fill the needs that they have. I've talked to so many desperate women who simply don't have the social support networks. They simply don't have anywhere else to go. They can't get any help from the government. They don't want to have an abortion, but they also don't know where to go. They don't know how to get baby clothes. They don't know how to get cribs. They don't know who's going to help them when they give birth. Is there going to be somebody to hold their hand? Is there any support available for somebody who wants their baby but doesn't feel like there's any road forward that doesn't involve having an abortion? And the only people who have been there for these women are Christian churches, are crisis pregnancy centers, funding these support centers, these resources centers to ensure that they have what they want. And even if they decide to make the other choice, even if they decide to go through an abortion, these centers are still there to help after that tragic choice. And these are, again, they're funded with donor dollars. This is about charitable tax status. This is not about the government funding these centers. This is about charitable tax status. But yet the Trudeau government is attacking these centers. There's so many problems with this. This is vicious. It's mean-spirited. And it's a deliberate attack on any choice except for abortion. Again, I want to emphasize, this government seems to think there is such a thing as unwanted babies, but no such thing as unwanted abortions. And so let's go through just a couple of other problems with this, because I really want people to take note of this. First, once again, Trudeau is just attacking anyone who seeks to tell the truth about abortion or alleviate the harm that abortion does. He is saying only one worldview about abortion is acceptable. And he is doing this, by the way, while setting up a new government website to make abortion more accessible elsewhere. So while he is setting up a website to facilitate abortion in the territories and places where it's more difficult to access abortion, he's attempting to make life more difficult for the resource centers that are just there to help women in a crisis pregnancy, to help women through a pregnancy. He wants them to give up their values in order to continue to function. So just like with euthanasia, abortion is the choice many people feel stuck with. Trudeau is fine with that. His worldview has blinded him to the reality that people are actually living on the ground. As I said earlier as well, this standard is not being applied across the board. Since when do charities have the legal obligation to explain all of the things that they do not offer? Are they obligated to explain that at a crisis pregnancy center, at a resource center, at a pregnancy care center, whichever name that they have, that they don't actually include abortion in that they don't refer for abortion or provide an abortion? Why should the onus be on a center that exists simply to help pregnant mothers to actually explain why they don't offer abortion or to state up front that they do? This is just ludicrous. And of course, it's only applied to those who seek life-affirming choices. As the political pro-life group Right Now pointed out, abortion clinics aren't forced to advertise adoption in case people want other options. Nobody ever considers, again, that the abortion they're getting might be unwanted, might be a result of coercion. In fact, it's not even a crime in Canada. It's not an exacerbating factor at sentencing. If a woman is beat up and loses her child, that's not considered the loss of a child by law in Canada. And the Trudeau government opposes legislation that would state that it is that. So there's so much wrong with this. Let's look at a few more aspects of this, besides the mean-spiritedness of it, the viciousness of it, and the reality that this is based on faulty information. I think that one of the reasons Trudeau is finally returning to his 2021 platform commitment to go after crisis pregnancy centers after waiting a couple of years is because he probably realizes that time is running out for him politically. And this is something I think that progressive leftist politicians do far better than conservative politicians do, is they make use of the time that they have in government to essentially change things as much as they can in the hopes that it will be politically difficult for their opponents to change it back once they take power. So he's banking on the fact that Pierre Poilievre doesn't want to touch the abortion issue with a 10-foot pole, that MPs who try to do so will be muzzled or told to keep their mouths shut, as we've seen in the past. And I think that he's basically thinking, well, if I've only got till next fall in power, if his government is propped up by the NDP and the Bloc Québécois long enough to make it to next October, I might as well target all of the pro-life groups while I can. I might as well make it very difficult for them to operate. I might as well target their speech. I might as well eliminate these centers if I can. And so he probably recognizes that he's not going to be the prime minister much longer. Again, the Trudeau hubris has been infamous for decades, so it's quite possible that he thinks he's going to be around for much longer. But I think the fact that he's pulling this move now indicates that he no longer cares about the fallout, because even for a Trudeau, even for a Liberal, I think going after centers that exist to dispense diapers and baby formula and cribs and other things like that is a pretty bad look. This is an area where the Conservative Party of Canada could quite easily make hay, where they could, quote the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada, that many women feel like they have no other choice, and Trudeau is eliminating the few resources available to those women who feel trapped into having the choice that Chrystia Freeland and Marcia Yen and Justin Trudeau thinks that they should have. So the Conservatives could, and we're going to find out very quickly, whether or not the Conservatives have any backbone at all on this issue. Their response to this is going to be very, very telling. And I very much hope that we're going to see something encouraging in the next week and the weeks to follow on this issue, because the Conservatives won't defend crisis pregnancy centers in a Canada that Pierre Poilievre describes as broken. That will just indicate that they have no spine whatsoever, and they're not even willing to go to the mat for desperate mothers who need the supplies that they cannot get anywhere else. Another aspect of this that I think is important to recognize is that this is something that abortion groups in Canada have been asking for a very long time. The Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada has been going after crisis pregnancy centers for a long time. In years past, they've released so-called sting operations where they went into crisis pregnancy centers and revealed that they were, in fact, crisis pregnancy centers and not abortion clinics, and then called on crisis pregnancy centers to either lose their charitable tax-exempt status or be forced to refer for abortions. Unfortunately, some of these crisis pregnancy centers have not responded well to that and have actually insisted, no, we're pro-choice. We don't offer one option over the other, which I think is hugely problematic, because if a center exists to offer the life-affirming choice to affirm life and take in donor dollars from Christian churches who are giving them money for that purpose, I think it's very important that they are pro-life and that they are life-affirming. So Trudeau's announcement here, the Liberal Party's announcement here, is the culmination of a decades-long campaign by groups like the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada to have these organizations targeted and have their charitable tax status removed. And again, I want you to think for a moment how mean it is, how cruel it is for an organization that admits that many women in Canada have abortions because they feel like they have no other choice, to again deny them an essential avenue where they can get the resources that nobody else is offering them. The Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada is advocating for abortion. They're not providing people diapers or formula. They claim to be pro-choice, but they will help you make exactly one choice, and that is to have your baby aborted in a clinic. That's all. Joyce Arthur and Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau might claim they care about all these other options, but their actions prove otherwise. Their actions prove that it's all garbage, that they want you to be able to get an abortion, but if you want to have a baby, you're entirely on your own. And so Christian churches have stepped up, crisis pregnancy centers have stepped up, and their response is, that's a problem too. We need to target these organizations. We need to shutter them. We need to restrict their speech because they don't offer the option that we think is most important, which is abortion. So this is the culmination of a very long-standing strategy by abortion groups. And I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that there's relevance here to the American situation, and there is. In the United States, you see all of these sting operations that are being launched against crisis pregnancy centers, which are referred to in the American mainstream media, the American left-wing media, as fake clinics. Although they're not fake clinics, they are just life-affirming, in some cases, medical centers, and in some cases, just resource centers where people can get, again, baby clothes, formula, cribs, those sorts of things. But because they don't offer abortion, again, they have to be targeted. And there was this very revealing moment back in 2022 between the leak of what we discovered would be the Dobbs decision and the release of the Dobbs decision, where a domestic terrorist group called Jane's Revenge was actually targeting crisis pregnancy centers. It firebombed a number of them. It vandalized a number of others because, again, these activists are so radical that the very presence of clinics that repudiate their bloody ideology were an offense to their worldview. They were also, I think, a rebuke to their worldview. And so we see the same thing happening in the States. There's a lot of media organizations that are coordinating with abortion groups to target crisis pregnancy centers and pregnancy care resource centers to try and get them shut down, to deny them government funding where they do, because in some American states they still do get government funding, and to deny them charitable tax exempt status, even though these groups exist for entirely and exclusively charitable reasons. I think that if we saw Kamala Harris and Tim Walz get elected, they're very much of Trudeau's ilk. They are radically pro-abortion. They've, again, never met an abortion they don't like. I've detailed their radical pro-abortion stance on previous podcasts. But if Americans look at the prime minister of the country attacking crisis pregnancy centers and asking why, what's wrong with churches funding centers that dispense resources to desperate women in need, especially when many women are having abortions they don't want to have? Take a good look at Canada and recognize that if you elect politicians like Justin Trudeau, you're going to get these kinds of results. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And so this very much has relevance to the American situation. I think there's one final point that's really important here, and this links back to several stories we've previously discussed on the Bridgehead briefing. Crisis pregnancy centers are very obviously only the first step. I wrote an essay several years back detailing how the time would be coming when progressive politicians in Canada would eventually target the charitable tax-exempt status of churches and essentially any religious institution that isn't on board with the progressive agenda as it pertains to LGBT ideology and abortion. I think the only reason they haven't done so already is the fact that they don't know how to distinguish between churches that hold to traditional values with regards to sexuality and abortion, and churches that don't. So, you have this sort of spiritual lapdogs of the sexual revolution, like the United Church, like the Episcopalian Church or the Anglican Church of Canada, and a number of churches like that. But then you also, and this complicates the narrative, right? You have mosques and gurdwaras, and you have all these religious institutions which aren't particularly noisy about issues like abortion, and many of them don't particularly care, but still hold pro-life views. And we saw this during the Canada Summer Jobs controversy in Canada several years ago, where the Trudeau government thought that by denying Canada Summer Jobs grants to organizations that identified as pro-life, they would only be targeting pro-life groups or overtly anti-abortion churches, but soon discovered that they had really angered a lot of imams. They'd angered a lot of Orthodox Jewish rabbis. I was at a meeting in Brampton with several lawyers to discuss this, and there was religious leaders of every stripe, because many of them aren't interested in voting on the abortion issue or campaigning on it, but also will not positively affirm that they support abortion. And so the values test, the values attestation on the Canada Summer Jobs program became a huge sticking point. And it really taught the Trudeau government a lesson that if you're going to actually poll Canadians and say, how many of you are willing to sign off on our values, they were going to end up losing a lot of people who traditionally vote for them. And so we haven't seen the Trudeau government explicitly go after churches, single out churches to deny them charitable status based on their sexual values or based on their life-affirming values. But that's because they haven't figured out a way yet to separate those Christian churches, so conservative Catholic churches, Reformed churches, evangelical churches, from those that are happy affirming these values, like the United Church. But I have no doubt that in the long run, they will find a way to do so. And again, recall a previous episode I did where we ran a little clip from a Justin Trudeau speech where he accused a conservative MP of showing up at an anti-abortion church in Florida. And of course, the Catholic Church in Canada is anti-abortion. The Reformed Church that I attend is anti-abortion. The evangelicals and the Baptists who participate in CCBR's programs attend anti-abortion churches. And so he was kind of showing his hand a little bit. First, he's going after crisis pregnancy centers and threatening to remove their charitable tax-exempt status unless they proactively talk about abortion, a standard that no other charity is held to. But what if Trudeau decides next that it's time for churches to lose their charitable exempt status, their tax exempt status, because they're an anti-abortion church, as he puts it, or they don't hold to the values that he now claims are synergistic with being Canadian, like LGBT ideology. Charities, crisis pregnancy centers are first, but they are not going to be the last. And LGBT activists and abortion activists have stated explicitly for years that institutions, especially religious institutions, that do not share their values should lose their tax-exempt status. And I think we have to prepare for the day when that does, in fact, take place, because that is definitely part of their plan. We've already seen very carefully written articles in both CTV and CBC where LGBT activists point to churches and say, how can a church that holds this view on sexuality still be tax exempt? How can a church that is misogynistic, that is to say pro-life, or bigoted, which is to say holds to biblical values on sexuality, or transphobic, which is to say they don't believe that children should be physically transitioned, how do they qualify for charitable status? So I think that's going to happen next. So there's a few things to keep an eye on with this story. First, recognize that this is the end of a long campaign by abortion groups, and recognize that this is just the first step in the government targeting organizations that hold to Christian and life-affirming values. Second, recognize that this is also a test for the conservatives. We've known the liberals were going to do this. As Chrystia Freeland said in that nauseating clip that I showed you, this was a 2021 platform commitment that they're now making good on, probably because they realize that they're running out of time. But it's a test for the conservatives, because if the conservatives refuse to oppose this now or decline to roll it back once it's put into place, it will tell us everything that we know, everything we need to know, about the Conservative Party of Canada, which has done actually a great job on the euthanasia file. I've been genuinely enthusiastic with how the Conservative Party of Canada has responded to euthanasia for mental illness and things like that. And so I hope that they continue their commitment to protecting the most vulnerable by also standing up for crisis pregnancy centers that offer essential services to women in need. And finally, recognize that choice is just a farce when it comes to Canada's abortion groups and our progressive politicians. The same organization that admits that many women in Canada are having unwanted abortions, not unwanted babies, unwanted abortions, is applauding this move by Trudeau's government to target the very centers that are providing those alternatives while providing no alternatives of their own. These are incredibly ghoulish people. These are not pro-choice people. These are pro-abortion people, and we should keep that in mind. Thanks so much for listening to the Bridgehead briefing this week. We hope you found this analysis helpful. If you'd like to check out this content, you can find us on any of the major podcast platforms. You can like this video, drop a comment with a suggestion for another angle, or just your take on this episode. And if you found it helpful, please do share it with others. Thanks so much for listening, and we hope you'll join us next week.